Echo TV is a co-production of Minnesota's Emergency, Community, and Health Outreach Collaborative of health, safety, emergency preparedness, ethnic and nonprofit agencies, and TPT's Minnesota channel.
Hello and welcome to ECHO, which stands for Emergency and Community Health Outreach. I'm your host, Lily McDonald, Executive Director for ECHO. ECHO brings information in different languages about important topics: health, safety, emergency, and civic engagement. Our audiences appreciate this information in their own language. Our program this time, Prepare for Emergency Evacuation. We have some guest experts who will give us some information about this subject, but first, we want you to watch this.
When an emergency threatens your area, the best way to stay safe is to know ahead of time what to do. Sometimes it is safer to take shelter where you are. Sometimes it is safer to leave the area. This is called an evacuation. You must be prepared to act and listen for any warnings. The warnings will tell you what to do. Warnings and information. You can listen to warnings on a low-cost weather radio or AM/FM portable radio. Test the batteries regularly and make sure it works. Sometimes events happen so quickly there is no time for warnings. If there is no official instruction, you must be prepared to act on your own. Whether a warning is issued or not, being prepared will make evacuation easier, safer, and less stressful for you and your family. There may be little or no time to make plans or gather supplies. Evacuating from work. Ask your employer about evacuation plans. Know the exits from your workplace, where they lead, and how long it takes to get out. Walk through stairwells. If you are in a tall building, it is often impossible to be rescued from the roof. Have a pair of flat walking shoes, a flashlight, and a battery-powered radio. You may need to walk to a collection point for public transportation. Evacuating from home. If you must leave your home, gather your family, your emergency kit, any prescription medicines, and follow official instructions. Leave a note saying where you plan to go. Take your pets along. Make plans now for how to handle your pets. Unlike service animals, pets are not allowed in most public shelters. If your children are at school, officials will arrange for their evacuation. You can join them when the danger is past. Do not try to pick them up at school unless directed to do so. Evacuating. You may not be able to drive your car home during the incident if roads are blocked or ramps closed. If driving is possible, officials may designate specific routes or destinations. Stay on these routes because shortcuts may be blocked. Do not drive through flooded areas and stay away from downed power lines. If you don't own a car, make travel arrangements with friends or family. In large evacuations, public safety officials may arrange for bus or other transportation out of the area. If you cannot go home, you may be directed to a public shelter. Otherwise, you may stay with friends or relatives. To make it easier to join your family, you may be asked to register with officials or with an organization, such as the American Red Cross. If you are likely to need assistance during an evacuation, make preparations to get that help. Practice with those who will help you to use available equipment or accessible exits. Returning. Officials may keep everyone out of an evacuated area until it is reasonably safe to return. You may be asked for identification when returning to make sure only people who have business or live in the area are allowed in. Listen for official information about any remaining hazards, safety precautions, or cleanup instructions.
Welcome back. You're watching ECHO, Emergency, Community, and Health Outreach. I'm your host, Lillian McDonald. We want everybody to know that this program, Prepare for Emergency Evacuation, really is pretty clear about when is a good time to evacuate and when it's not a good time to evacuate. You might want to shelter in place. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between the two. And joining me to talk about this subject, we have three guest experts. First, we have Thomas Deegan. He is the Continuity of Operations Planning Coordinator for the City of Minneapolis. Also with him is Matt Bostrom. He's the Assistant Police Chief for the City of St. Paul. And in the middle, we have Megan Fiegel from the American Red Cross Twin Cities chapter. Thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
We really do appreciate your expertise and your time. And a very important subject. Hope we never have to mass evacuate, but we need to be prepared nonetheless. Let's start with you, Matt. When should we mass evacuate? I mean, what do we mean by it? And what's the difference between mass evacuation and shelter in place? When do we stay? When do we go?
Very important questions, and I think what we're going to talk a lot about today as a panel is thinking ahead. And so the first thing you need to understand is that not all evacuations are the same. They're going to be driven by, is it a natural disaster? So, you know, we're having a flood event, then that will determine what pathways, how many people need to move, and what's the best way to communicate that. The other thing is it could be a man-made disaster. Let's think of a train derailment where a number of train cars are leave the tracks, so there's a large derailment, and then chemical issues occur after that. What type of is that a neighborhood evacuation? And then finally, you know, in my line of work, I have to think about maybe the worst of the worst. What happens if it's an act of terrorism? What happens then? And so our response then is first understand what the emergency is, and then have a strategy on how we're going to evacuate based on that emergency.
And probably most important is to not to come up with that strategy on the fly.
Precisely.
So we have to talk about these things early in advance.
Exactly.
So natural disaster, man-made disaster, or something in between, an accident.
And arguably, yeah, an accident, and partly the man-made, is it intentional? Is it an accident? Or is it terrorism because it was intentional?
Now, we might not know the answer to that right off the bat.
Correct.
So how do we respond then?
Well, that's what they're paying us to do, is that in many ways the response is going to be the same for fire service, for EMS service, for others such as the Red Cross that become our community partners as we respond. The difference is that if it's a natural disaster, or if it's a man-made but an accident, there's no investigation. However, if it's a act of terrorism, things shift a little bit.
Sure.
So what happens is that it complicates matters for law enforcement at that point, because it's actually what we would consider a crime scene. So there's some things that we have part of our plan in these events as we move toward that event, that not only do we prepare to investigate, we also keep the conditions safe for all of the responders that are there.
Well, a quick question then. We've got lots of questions for everybody, but just one more quick question, Matt, for you, and that is how do I know when it's a time to evacuate, and how do I know when it's a time to shelter in place, which simply means stay put?
I would tell people not to be too quick to evacuate. Oftentimes, the best thing to do is to stay at home, or to stay in your office until you get further direction. And that's one of those pieces is to allow us to determine what the risks are if you were to start to move. And so allow your public safety leaders to quick do an assessment and then start communicating, hey, stay where you are, this is going to blow over, and so the best place for you to be is where you are right now. We could complicate matters further if people just poured out into the street and attempted to evacuate on their own. So those are the types of things that we would do as leaders in the community to help, so that folks have a better understanding as to exactly what they need to do.
You're trained to let us know in a relatively quick form, and we can talk about the media a little bit later and how they'll play a role in all of that work. But before we stay or go, we need to know how to get ready for an evacuation. Megan, how would you do it if a disaster is unexpected? How do you prepare for something like that?
There are really 3 easy steps that you can do. The first is to make a plan. Know what you're going to do in case you have to get out. We spend a lot of time doing this at the Red Cross, and it's kind of our expertise. So make a contact outside of your area, preferably in another state, someplace that if you had to get a considerable distance away that you could get to in a few hours, and make sure that you exchange contact information with that friend or relative who's on the other end where your evacuation destination is.
And that's important to know, because if this happens in Florida, I'm here in Minnesota, you know, I've got point of contacts that I can talk to outside of where the disaster is, because there's a lot happening right there at that moment.
And it's really crucial to share the plan with all members of your family or whoever you're going to be evacuating with. Make sure everyone has a copy of the phone numbers and knows the address in case you were to get separated. So that
and
way,
keep it current.
Right.
Yeah.
Build a kit. Keep an emergency kit. I'm sure most people have a good first aid kit in their home and in their car, but there are some very specific items that we recommend keeping in an emergency kit. A battery-powered radio and flashlight, and extra batteries, because sometimes you just can't find electricity.
Right.
Copies of important papers, specifically ID. We all need to have a copy of our ID, and then make sure all members of your group have copies of their ID too.
Right.
Enough food and water to get you through a couple days. We recommend 3 days.
Okay. And don't forget the pets.
Exactly.
If you have pets, they need some food too.
Yep.
And by important papers, you're talking about what? Medical records?
Medical records, identification, proof of that you own your home or your residence.
Okay. So when you get back, you can claim your turf, so to speak. Tom, how do I know whether or not I need to go and evacuate? And how fast am I going to know that?
Well, it depends on the situation. If you have a flood, as an example, obviously there's going to be plenty of time to prepare for that. The media, radio, other type of communication outlets are going to be integral for you to get that type of information, so you need to pay attention to that. Another situation, such as if you had a fire, obviously that's going to be something that's going to come on quickly. So in that particular case, much like what Megan is talking about, you're going to want to pre-plan that. You're going to want to have a meeting place outside your house. You're going to make sure you have working smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and those types of things. And lastly, if you have a evacuation that may occur in your place of business, you want to make sure that your business management has some type of evacuation plan for you, and that's been practiced.
Yeah, you know, I was just going to say, it's not practiced very often, or how often should it be practiced? I mean, I was going through my mind, what are the exits at my office? And that's a good thing to have in your head before the evacuation occurs.
Absolutely, and oftentimes, certainly in any type of business environment, if you're going to a grocery store, you should be cognizant of the exits. Most people will follow the way out that they came in. So oftentimes, what you see today, in particular around elevators and on each floors, you'll see an evacuation plan, which indicates where you're at and where you should go to notify or identify those stairwells that you're going to get out on. But just as a rule of thumb, it's just good common sense. You're in a place that you're unfamiliar with, whether it's at work or visiting somewhere, be aware of those exits in the event of an emergency.
And if you're traveling out of town, let's say you're in a hotel, same thing. Think about how to get out if you're in that hotel and you're out of town. And there are other things to think about too, like if I park and I leave my car in a parking ramp, should I be running to the ramp to get the car or just head on out the street? I mean, there's guidance for that for businesses that have made some plans at work. And schools as well. What about the house? Okay. Do I just leave it high and dry, or if I don't have a time, or what? Lock it up?
Well, I would say when it comes to that, one of the challenges is that sometimes people overreact. You know, they want to run out too quickly. And the way I look at it is think about the days when, and for you it must have just been a few days ago, but for those of us that were in elementary school a long time ago, we were very intentional about how we went out, outside. All right, you lined up. You were intentional about which doors. You knew which exits, and you practiced it. All right. Well, in the same fashion, when you're leaving your house for a long vacation, think in those terms. Think about not that you may be gone for 2 weeks, but what would you do to your house if you're going to be gone for 2 weeks? That's what should run through. Should you, you lock it up, you check the windows, you make sure all the pilot lights are off if you have those kinds of things, turn the water heater down. I mean, there's a variety of those things that you would do. Just take that mindset, and I think that's probably, instead of, for some people, you might have time to put together a checklist of sorts, but my recommendation is just think in terms of an extended vacation. What would you do to your house? But I ask you to do one more thing, and that is when you leave. This is somewhat unique that most people don't do, and we don't normally advise this, but leave a note on the door that that has a contact number.
Sure.
You know, a contact number of where to reach you, or an address or something like that, so we could get a hold of you if something were to go wrong in that area and we needed contact.
What about pets, Megan? You can leave the house, you leave the pets there or take them with?
You want to include your pets in your disaster plan.
Okay.
And as part of your plan, if you're going to be evacuating in your own vehicle, make sure you have extra pet food, a pet carrier, and things so that your pet can be comfortable as well. Things change slightly when we start talking about sheltering, and if there's going to be a shelter set up.
All right, so some shelters can take pets, others can't, so plan for that as well.
Right, and that, anyone else want to chime in on that one?
Tom, would you want to add to that, or for shelter preps?
I think those are good points to make. Obviously, much like ourselves, we need to make sure we have our vaccination records, pet IDs, make certain that that pet is comfortable in whatever type of cage or some type of confinement that you're going to transport them with, and certainly be familiar with your immediate surroundings. So in the event you are going to leave your home, maybe the hotel that you're thinking you're going to go to won't allow that pet to come.
So plan ahead.
So plan ahead.
That's a common theme here. What about folks in wheelchairs or that have some critical needs like this?
Practice, practice, practice your plan. If you have limited mobility or are wheelchair bound or other pressing needs, it's best to form a small group of people that you can discuss your plans with and say, here's what I'd like to do, would you be willing to help me? And have a few backups, because depending on the geography of a disaster or other event that could cause an evacuation, it might be difficult for the first person you thought who was going to help you.
Got to reach out for the senior citizens that may have special circumstances or others that need special care. What about children, Matt? Their school systems practice plans, I imagine.
Sure, and that's one of the things that it's important for all of us in public safety to continue to work with the other folks that are doing similar have similar initiatives in the schools, because we do concern ourselves with pets, but first and foremost, families, first thing that a parent will do is reach out to that school and make sure that the child is okay. And so what we appeal to the schools is to have the capability of making sure that they can do quick notification of the parents that
because you don't want all the parents running to school. That's going to complicate the problem.
Exactly.
So schools need to be sure they notify parents, and they also practice emergency evacuation or shelter-in-place planning. Megan, what about finding a shelter? If we're in a situation where we need to find a shelter because of an evacuation, where's the place to go? Red Cross, I know, is...
Yep, the Red Cross, and we'll work with our city partners and officials to make sure that all people have access to that information and know where they can go. We don't release the locations of the shelters ahead of time because, quite frankly, we need to determine what space can best accommodate depending on the type of
So there's some
shelter.
identified places that you have in your back pocket, so to speak, and then depending upon where, what, and when is how you roll that information out. What if I have a car? Tom, what if I have a car and I'm in a situation I need to evacuate? Then what?
Again, you need to follow your local media, follow your public safety officials, police in particular, because you may get in your car, in particular in a flood situation, and encounter high waters, and now you've compromised your evacuation plan. What we recommend is that you keep a kit in your car, much like you would for anything else that we've discussed. Stay on those routes that are recommended by your public safety officials. You have to pay attention to whatever media outlet, and in this case, if the TVs aren't available, certainly that emergency kit, having a radio with fresh batteries so you can listen if the route that you had predetermined that you were going to use now has been changed because of some extending circumstances, so you'll be prepared for that.
What about when it's all over and it's time to come home and size up the damage, Tom? When am I going to know it's time to go home, time to go back to work, time to go back to school? Face it.
Certainly it's going to depend on the type of disaster, if it's natural or man-made, but your public safety official is going to be your most direct communicating person that you're going to want to hook up with. Obviously, if you had a situation where it was a fire, then you're going to deal with the fire chief. It was some type of mass evacuation. Law enforcement are going to be the folks that are going to be controlling the perimeter. As stated earlier, that's why having that identification with you is going to be critical, so you can hook up with that law enforcement official and let you back into the area, and in particular, back into your home.
Yeah, and this is all going to be barricaded. I'm just imagining now I could just pick up the phone and call Matt. I know him. He's my assistant police chief in the city of St. Paul. And he'll be available to take my call, won't he? Probably not. So this is where the media is going to play a key role.
Yes.
And for ECHO audiences, we'll be cooperating as well with our media outlets. And we know that it's not just going to be TV and it's not just going to be radio anymore, but we also have the web, toll-free phone line, and agencies will also be posting and reposting and circulating information as resources become available. At least that is the plan. I mean, you know, that's the intention of how we can make it all work. You know, we've talked about a lot of different agencies that are involved. I want to just take one more second and talk about the Red Cross. There are other agencies too that people can go to, but you know, who calls down the Red Cross and gets you guys into action?
Well, we work really closely year-round with our city partners to make sure that when someone says go, we know how to go. And so we're working very closely with our police and fire departments and with municipalities and the state government to make sure that our plan is going to be, number one, the safety of our people is the most important thing in the community. And so it's a lot of different overlapping circles happening at the same time.
So you when the emergency response happens, they call you and get you going. How long does it take to set up a shelter system if it was even necessary?
We have the materials ready. We can be up and running in just a few hours. I mean, don't want to put pressure on the local Red Cross, but we're ready. That's what we do. We're ready at a moment's notice. We have a fabulous pool of volunteers who are just always there to help.
Always there and ready to go. And people can also take on volunteerism if they would like with their own local Red Cross, I imagine. You know, and that's one thing I could add is I took a first aid and a CPR class, and I'll have to say it makes me feel a little bit more empowered because you guys might be a little bit busy to take care of my immediate needs. I've got to get by for a little while for myself and my family. You recommend folks get involved in this way?
Yeah, I do. I think having a basic understanding of first aid gives you a great deal of confidence. First, you can tend to members of your family, but to your neighbors and others. And so just to have those basic conditions met help a lot. And like you mentioned, it's a key piece. It changes the way you act and the way you treat other people, and it's a tremendous benefit to just have that experience under your belt.
And to volunteer in programs too, so you can learn a little bit more along the way. We've talked about lots of different agencies that can help you here. We've talked about fire, health, police, American Red Cross, and others. ECHO will have all of this information on our website, echominnesota.org. There's also ready.gov, which we'll mention as just sort of two top websites that house all of this information, sort of one-stop shopping for you. And those websites, by the way, are worldwide, so you can check them from anywhere. And then folks can touch base locally, whether they're in Minneapolis, St. Paul, or greater Minnesota, or in other states. Check your local resources. Each of you, take a moment. What else would you add from your own perspectives and expertise, whether it's continuity of operations planning for schools, work, or home, volunteering or shelters, or from your perspective, Matt, in terms of mass evacuation?
Well, I would just, what I was thinking about is what sometimes people do when they're evacuating, they have their special route. And I was thinking about that when Tom was talking, that understand that the officers are there directing you a certain path. Don't take your favorite route during times of evacuation. Make sure that you're attentive to the signs, pay attention to those, and don't all of a sudden take a shortcut.
It may not be there anyway for you.
Correct, exactly.
How about you, May?
I would say tonight, whenever you have the opportunity, just take a few minutes to put together your kits, because it really is good to be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. And it's something that you can involve all of the members of your household in, and can actually create some great conversation about how you're going to be prepared, and so that you're thinking about it.
Take some of the panic out of it, too.
Yeah.
If you've talked about it, you prepared a little bit about it, it takes a little bit of the fear out of it. Tom, how about you?
The thing I'd like to add is when we talked about our non-ambulatory folks, in particular in the business environment. Many businesses today have evac type chairs, and in an emergency we have to make sure we help and take care of these people. We talked a lot about what we would do in our homes, but we also need to be cognizant about these folks in the workplace. And if you have a peer like that within your particular area, reach out and help them.
Great. I'd like to thank you for your information. And folks, we've talked about lots of different things, but we'll try and boil it down into these 3 key messages. First, be prepared for an emergency mass evacuation. Second, listen for warnings and follow official directions. And third, if there are no warnings, be ready to act on your own. My thanks to all 3 of you for joining us on this ECHO program. We appreciate it. And to you for watching this program. If you'd like more information about ECHO or this topic, we encourage you to check in with us on our website, www.echominnesota.org. Until next time, I'm your host, Lily McDonald. Thanks for watching.
ECHO TV is a co-production of Minnesota's Emergency, Community, and Health Outreach Collaborative of Health, Safety, Emergency Preparedness, Ethnic and Nonprofit Agencies, and TPT's Minnesota Channel.